Hi, everybody. How are you? Good. Excellent. So, I've been in computer security for about 28 years now ish, doing all kinds of things. I started off as a breaker, so I just break into everything I could possibly break into. About one third of all web based vulnerabilities that are top ranked came from my lab here in Austin, actually. Yeah, I've broken into the back end of 2,100 banks and flight control systems, water power, flight control systems, all kinds of terrible things. Anyway, so what I'm going to be talking about today is a little different than you might be expecting. This is largely about the incentives and the problems associated with being in security, and then I'll kind of dovetail it back into probably whatever it is that you all do here. So number one of the biggest problems is that people talk about a risk-based approach to security. That is not happening. Anybody who says it's happening either doesn't understand or is selling something or something, but this is not actually something that occurs today. I believe it can happen. We're just nowhere near there yet. So I'm going to go through why I'm saying that. Um, so let's first talk about the talent that are in information security today, as opposed to when I got started 20 something years ago, or even call it 15 years ago. We've seen a subtle but noticeable decline in the average skill level of people in information security. And I asked a lot of kind of old timey security people about this. Like, are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing? Am I crazy? Like, these are people who are very, very important, doing very important things at very big companies that you all use, and they're saying things that we've known to not be true for at least 20 years. So clearly there's some degradation here, and it's noticeable. And they see the same thing happening. And we think it might be a number of different causes. Number one, there's a brain drain. So people kind of leave security, or they get promoted up out of security, or they retire, or they sell their company and then they turn into investment capitalists or whatever. So they're just leaving security. So that's probably the number one biggest problem. Number two is um, I think what ended up happening is when we started, there really wasn't, excuse me, there really wasn't an industry of security. You did it because you liked it. And now it is a very money-driven, profit-oriented business. It's grown up. It's a real thing now. So you have this massive influx of people who are just getting into it because they see a paycheck, as opposed to just being nerds who liked playing Doom in their basement or whatever. And so that has kind of led to a glut in the market of, I would say, low-end security people who might eventually become good eventually, with the right tutelage, but they're starting with the wrong incentives. So number three is there's a strain to get as many people as we can in security. It's sort of like we need more butts and seats. We need more people actually doing security. That has led to recruitment of all kinds of kind of dubious places to get people into InfoSec. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of people in the low end of the market who don't really end up becoming particularly good for quite a while. It takes, like, call it 3 years to 5 years before they're really useful in that job. But they're being placed in very important analyst positions as if they already have the skill, but they do not. And then lastly, and the one I want to spend the most time on, is CISO incentives. So the most senior people inside of security are called chief information security officers. They're the ones who run your security program for you. Some of them are not very technical. They're more like business focused people, but those are supposed to be the people who run your security for you. They do all of everything that's important about your security program. They'll design it, they'll architect it, and have other people underneath them deploy it. But there's really, really bad incentives. Oops, I pressed up and I should have pressed down. This is a very weird controller here. Okay, so the real incentives of a CISO are along these lines. So number one, do not get fired. It sounds simple, but it's really, really important if you're in that job, because it's very easy to get fired. If you get hacked a lot, you get fired. Like, if you're not doing your job, you're going to get fired. So that really incentivizes you to do very specific kind of hokey things to get just far enough along that you're not going to get fired. So you basically focus on dashboards. You build out things for the board that don't really do anything, and the board knows they don't do anything. and you just kind of like act like you're working all day and you're really maybe not doing anything. Or in some cases, the dashboards might actually be telling you the exact opposite of the useful information, but it doesn't matter. You just need to look like you're doing something important. Okay, so I know that sounds terrible, but this is actually real life. So number two, you don't increase your personal liability. And what that means is if I am personally sticking my neck out because I say this thing is secure or whatever, or if I'm finding things and not fixing those things, that is very bad because now we run into like negligence, fraudulent negligence in some cases. So try to avoid that. That would be bad. And then last, quit before the bad thing happens because you know you're not doing your job. You can't do your job particularly well because the incentives are all messed up. And I'll get into more of that in a second. But you basically just need to leave. So about 18 months into your job, you'll do 2 projects, maybe 3, a new firewall project, a new antivirus project, maybe a SIM or a IDS product or something that you deploy, and then get out. You'll write your letter and say, this was a great working here, but I need to move on in my career, blah, 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 and you're out. And the bad thing happens, you weren't there long enough to take the real blame for it, and you've already left, most likely, if it did happen. So that's why we see turnover rates of less than 24 months for CISOs, and typically around 18 months. It's because of this. So here's an example of one of the technology problems with being a CISO. So there's this thing called EASM, External Attack Surface Management. And so this is my world. I actually just recently sold a company in this market to a publicly traded company called Tenable. And the software basically just finds all of the websites and servers and printers and whatever that are on the public internet for that company. You'd think that they would know, but no big company has any idea what they own after they get over, let's say, 100 people or over 100 websites. They just lose track. So you get to an enterprise level and you've lost entire companies. And I'm not exaggerating. Like we'll find like 1,000-person company. This company just forgot that they owned, which is pretty terrifying. So let's say I have the ability to find a whole bunch of new assets. Associated with those assets are a whole bunch of vulnerabilities. If I now know about those vulnerabilities, I am now liable to go fix them because it's under my watch. I now know that those vulnerabilities exist. So my liability goes up if I find out that I'm more vulnerable. If I use external attack surface management, if I find more vulnerabilities, my liability goes up. So what's my incentive? Don't find those vulnerabilities. Don't use EASM. Don't use security scanning. Yeah, okay. So now you're thinking, well, let's get over that. Let's say we can figure out how to deal with that incentive somehow. And now we want to scan everything. And I mean everything, like every single thing everywhere. Well, first of all, you can't because of that EASM problem. You just can't. You don't know where everything is. So how are you going to scan the things if you don't know where they are? Number two, I went and asked some scanning companies, some very big ones, and I used to work for one of them a long time ago. And I asked them, like, okay, well, what if I wanted to turn on whatever 4 billion websites across the internet, just like flip them all on? What would you do? What would that take to do it? And they're like, no, Robert, that's like patently not possible. Like if you wanted to go to like 10,000 companies to maybe like 100,000, maybe if we really stretched, we could do it, but our infrastructure wouldn't be able to support anything beyond that. So they just literally can't do it. I don't mean like figuratively can't do it. They literally would have to completely re-architect their entire company to support an idea like that. So they can't. So if you're a very large enterprise and you have millions and millions and millions of websites, which some of them do, then you effectively are already pricing yourself out of what the scanning companies can possibly do. They just literally cannot do it. So you also can't afford it because those guys do charge an arm and a leg. We're talking, a couple $100 on the low end per scan per month, and sometimes much higher than that, like multi-thousands of dollars times millions. I'm sorry, you probably just do not make enough money to support just scanning alone. That's not even talking about fixing the issues. That's just knowing that the vulnerabilities existing on those machines at all. And then back to the talent problem, the type of talent that we currently have in the market is actually just not qualified to handle these super complicated vulnerabilities that are popping out of these scanners. And scanners are getting better at finding more esoteric vulnerabilities. So you're actually encountering more vulnerabilities that are more complicated, and the people are less good than they used to be to handle even the old vulnerabilities, let alone all the new magical, newfangled stuff that's coming out. So this brings us to WAFs. WAFs stands for Web Application Firewall. And a Web Application Firewall is basically a machine or a service where you route your traffic through the system. It goes to something that hits a rules engine, sometimes it's a heuristics engine, and it pops out the other side if it's good, and if it's bad, it stops right there. There's a couple ways to deploy this. Sometimes they're in line, sometimes they're out of line. If they're out of line, no bueno, you got to have them in line. Talk to me afterwards why you should never do it out of line. But anyway, so you're thinking I'll install WAFs instead of worrying about it. I won't have to worry about all of my people. I'll just install these devices and I'll be good to go. Okay, I'm going to tell you why you can't do that. So first of all, your team lacks the skill to manage these things. If you thought trying to understand the vulnerability was bad, try to understand the vulnerability and know how to patch it. Like that's double the complexity. That's not halving the complexity. And unfortunately, WAFs have the kind of issue where they can very easily break things. They're very complicated. So if I write a rule and I say I want to stop this one thing, if that thing looks an awful lot like benign traffic, I will stop benign traffic. So you're basically denial servicing yourself effectively. That's not good. Next, WAFs are very expensive. So not only do you have the cost of the scanning we were talking about before, but now you have the cost of running the WAFs. And there's multiple costs associated with it. You don't just have the cost of the WAF, you also have to have the cost of the analyst who's sitting there monitoring the WAF and doing all the stuff that they're going to do. If you're using like a third-party SOC or something, they have to go do that work for you. So the other problem is they cannot inline everything everywhere all the time. So if you wanted to, let's say, man the middle of 100% of all website traffic everywhere, you are talking about a data center that would probably be like the footprint of a fairly large US state. Like this is just not physically possible to do what we're talking about. So it's just not, it's not tenable, no pun intended. So there's also this weird thing called a patch wall. So I've talked very heavily with the WAF industry and trying to figure out, hey, is this possible to do something like this? And they're like, nope. But let's say I wanted to do it anyway. I like somehow figured out a way to do it. We figured out nuclear fusion. Who cares? We just figured it out. Okay, well, then you still have this thing called a patch wall. So there is a class of vulnerabilities called a 0-day. It's a brand new vulnerability that just came out like today or something, like 10 seconds ago. Well, what happens if I give the vulnerability to a system? Maybe it's AI, probably doesn't even have to be because there's ways to process it more heuristically, much faster than that. But it takes the vulnerability and it basically just fires it out to the website the second it gets it. How fast can I do that? So I ran some tests and I was able to attack about 100 machines in 0.02 seconds. So by way of example, if I try to log into that exact same machine, I'm able to log in about 1 second because login takes a while to run the hashing algorithm. And if I want to patch that box and I want to run like sudo apt-get update, sudo apt-get-y upgrade, enter, and then have it run, that takes about as fast as it goes is about 10 seconds, and usually a lot longer than that. So fastest for me to attack it is 0.02 seconds. Fast to patch is 10 seconds. That's not going to work. So what about WAFs? Could we use a WAF? So I talked to the WAF guys. I'm like, what would you do? How fast can you update the backplane? And they're like multi-seconds. So we're 2 orders of magnitude at least before they could do the patch. And so I'm already on the box doing whatever I want if I give them the exploit at the exact same time. So if the exploit appears in my inbox at the same time they get it in their inbox, I'm the bad guy, I win. So let's talk about stoplight infosec. So stoplight infosec is what I like to refer to as anything that says like high, medium, and low, or critical, high, medium, or whatever, or red, yellow, green, or some number between 1 and 10, or ABCD, or there's a bunch of different versions of this exact same thing. It's all terrible, like really, really, really bad. And it took me a long time of trying to like figure out how to explain why it's so bad, but I think I've come up with a couple of ways that might make more sense. But just think for a second, when you're thinking critical, you're probably thinking a world-ending vulnerability. Like this is going to take our company out, or maybe even the whole world out. Like how critical is critical? Well, it's sort of subjective. And that's the problem. It's always subjective. If I'm talking about a critical vulnerability that's on a machine that's not plugged into the internet, is that really critical? Probably not. It's missing business context. It's missing context of what it could do if it was compromised. So effectively, if you don't like wasting time, you really do have to have some business context of where this thing lives. If it's a staging environment as opposed to a production environment, maybe it's a medium, or maybe it's a really, really critical thing because that staging environment has access to the same database. So there's a lot of things you have to know about websites before you move things into kind of an arbitrary bucket like high, medium, low. But it gets worse, so much worse. So let's say I have a vulnerability, and an average vulnerability on a scale from 1 to 10 is a 5, right? We can all agree. So let's say the full replacement cost for an old laptop is about $100 if I went on eBay right now and I went and try to buy now or whatever, right? There's a lot of old laptops and people are trying to get rid of them. Now, are you saying that by that math, double that, the worst vulnerability, the world-ending vulnerability that's a 10, are you saying it's $200? Does that make any sense? Obviously, that math doesn't work. And so when I talk to people who work on this space, and I'm like, okay, why are you ranking things this way? Like, how did you come up with this weird number, like 5? Where does that number come from? And they're like, well, we could change it to a 6. I'm like, what? No, what? No, I'm not saying change the number. I'm like, where did you get the number? Where's this coming from? And it's the best minds in this space are doing things that are just like guesses, straight up guesses, which should terrify you. And it is not $20 or $200 or whatever. It could be millions or maybe billions, depending on how big your company is and how bad the vulnerability is. So this is another thing that's terrible that a lot of companies are doing now, which is that they're averaging risk. The problem with averaging risk is it incentivizes you to increase risk, not decrease risk. So let's say I have like 10 sites and all of them are getting an A, whatever that means, because they all have this minor vulnerability on them. And one of them has the world-ending F. We all agree, like if somebody from the future comes back in time and they're like, that vulnerability is the one that takes us all out, right? That one right there. So we know it's like not a guess. Well, if I average it all up and I have about 20 websites, it's an A. So I guess I don't need to fix it, right? I mean, that's what the math says. So, and this is where the best thinking is right now, which is terrible. It's really bad. So do not average. So this is what the current state is right now. People don't know where their assets are. They're not scanning everything. They're not prioritizing based on actual business risk. This is not a plan. This is what you do when you're just guessing. And now sometimes the guesses are pretty good. I'm not saying that people aren't instinctively good at saying, oof, this is really bad. It's come out and a whole bunch of people are getting hacked right now. Okay, fine. But if it's not that kind of vulnerability, how do you do the ranking? I remember I was sitting, I was the CISO of a company a long time ago that was building cell phones, and they're like, this new vulnerability came out called Rowhammer, and I'm like, holy crap, it's so bad, like really, really, really bad. We're all going to get completely nuked here. And then I did the math, and I'm like, wait, the full replacement cost to change every single piece of RAM to an error correcting RAM across the entire enterprise and every cell phone and every printer and anything that has a circuit board in it is like millions and millions of dollars. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. It doesn't make no sense. We're gonna deal with the risk. Once you're able to objectively look at the costs associated with it and think about the full replacement cost and what the vulnerability actually will cost, then you can make an objective decision. So this is what the current state of the art is when people go in from CISO perspective and they start talking to their CFO, let's say. And CFOs, make no mistake, are the real risk officers of the company because they have to deal with all kinds of risk, not just website risk or something. So this is a typical conversation. We have 2 command injections, 3 cross-sites, or 3 SQL injections, 1 cross-site request forgery, a misconfigured htaccess file in Apache. So I want $50,000 to change our grade from a B- to a B+. And the CFO is like, what the hell are you talking about? What is that? It's all just gibberish. It means absolutely nothing. And you probably made this up because like your dashboards are also made up. I'm looking at your dashboards and those things are definitely made up. So why should I believe any of this garbage? And just so you know, like this isn't like an opinion here. A friend of mine, he was a CEO and then he became a board member of a company. And I said, so what do you think of the security team now that you've moved up in the world? Like, how's that working for you? And he's like, well, when I was a CEO, I thought they were kind of funny. Like the CISO would walk in and he'd be laughing and like, it's like, oh, we should totally do this thing and we'd have a good time and whatever. And I thought it was kind of just a joke and funny. But now as a board member, I want them out of the room as fast as I can possibly get them out of the room because they have no idea what they're talking about. We need to get back to things that matter like sales and marketing. And I don't blame him because we're giving him really, really terrible information. So this is what I want the conversation to look like. We have $2 million of expected loss over the next 12 months, and I like $50,000 to remediate that. And so the CFO can reasonably ask, let me see your math, right? Because that's a much more adult conversation. You're talking about the thing that business talks about. They talk about money. They don't talk about weird like issues within things. Like that's just not how businesses work. And so this is where I want the entire industry to move. So let's talk about cyber insurance. This is a very hot thing. I've spent a lot of time talking with both the insurance providers, warranty providers, actuaries, and a bunch of other people around that space who work on try to identify what the value of an asset is and whether you should insure the thing or not insure the thing. So number one, you need insurance. At least here in the United States, there's other countries where maybe this isn't such a big deal, but in the United States, you really do need insurance because your customers will demand that you have insurance before they'll work with you. So they'll in their contracts they'll say like here's like I need to be the first named. I need the $1 million on the first if the bad thing happens. I need to be named, and they get the first $1 million of the first tranche or whatever, and you have to have at least $5 million or whatever in your total policy, et cetera. Right? There's a bunch of different versions of this conversation, but just go talk to sales. If you talk to your sales team, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And so you're like, okay, great. I'm going to go out and get insurance. But the thing is, you haven't instrumented everything properly because that ESM thing I was talking about, the EASM thing you are not using because it just increases your risk. So you're like, screw it. I don't, or it increases your personal liability as opposed to corporate risk. So you don't do your diligence. You don't have EASM. Therefore, you're not scanning everything properly. Therefore, you're going to get hacked. And that's okay. Everybody gets hacked. Don't worry about that. It's actually not that big a deal. It happens all the time, happens to everybody. I prefer it if you don't get hacked, and there's lots of mitigating things we can talk about. But the important part is you will get hacked. So then, rightfully, you're looking at your insurance policy and you're like, hey, we should probably trigger this claim, right? We're going to get our money back. We're going to get millions of dollars for free, basically. This worked. So the insurance companies, they will pay out. This is a bit of a misnomer. A lot of people think, oh, insurance doesn't want to pay out. They actually do want to pay out. Because they want to make sure that the industry knows that there's a real market for what they're doing. They don't want you to believe that this isn't a real thing. They need it to be a real thing. However, after your policy expires, they very likely will not let you renew. So the problem with that is your customers, like I said before, demand that you have cyber insurance. So if you can't have cyber insurance anymore, what are your customers going to do? Are they just going to go, oh, well? No, they're going to say, sorry, we can't do business with you. We'll go do business with somebody else. So effectively, you both have to have cyber insurance and you also cannot use cyber insurance. Does that make sense? Which means we're back to having to be secure again, which is a very strange, weird thing. Anyway, so there's a bunch of other teams that I think are completely unaware that security exists. They don't understand what they're for. They're just not talking to each other. Some of my best friends are some of the best marketers in the world, like top best marketers in the world, like the head of the SEO for Condé Nast, the head of SEO for Chicago Tribune, the head of SEO for LinkedIn, the CMO of Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like very high end marketing people. And I call them my best friends. If they were here, we'd all go drinking. When I talk to them, I'm like, okay, do you know your security team? Have you met them? Do you know who their names are or whatever? Fully, absolutely not. None of them do. I'm the one security friend, which is bizarre. I'm like, well, you have really smart people in your company who can help you with all these hackers who are trying to break in your WordPress sites and putting spam into your systems and whatever, right? Because there's a lot of things, both negative and positive SEO wise, that can happen. And your competitors definitely want to submarine you in search engine results. You could go talk to them. You have experts in your company who can help you with this. They're like, I never really thought about it. So that kind of got me down this train of thought. There's all these different disparate teams within the company that just are not taking advantage of these highly technical people. And unfortunately, and this is my industry here, we're also bad at reaching out to all these teams because we don't know how to help them. We don't know what their problems are because we never talk to anybody because we're stuck in a cave or inside of a knock or whatever we're doing. So marketing is the first one. That's kind of got me down to thinking. Number two is biz dev. So biz dev kind of asked the question, should we do business with this company? Are we putting our crown jewels in this company, and is that going to be good or not? So you can basically ask your security team, hey, can you just do a quick assessment of their security posture? Tell me what you think. Like, if we put our data in there, is it going to get hacked? That would be bad. Like, we'd like to avoid that. That kind of makes sense, right? You can also ask interesting questions like who else is using them. Like security people have a very interesting set of skills. Like you can ask them what other projects they're working on. Are they working on things that are competitive? They can do that kind of research in ways that you would be surprised potentially that they can do it. So board and M&A strategy. So I did not believe this was going to be a real thing. I just kind of always wanted it to be a real thing. I'm just one of those kind of hopeful people, I guess. I was like, I bet you could use looking at the external posture of people's companies and try to predict what their company is worth. Not necessarily from an intellectual property perspective or anything inside the company walls, but anything outside the company, you could predict it. So for instance, let's say they have machines that they've personally built, like they built the machines, they racked it, they stacked it, they put it in a data center. That has CapEx. There's a capital value to that thing. If they try to sell it, it's worth something. As opposed to if they go to EC2 and they swipe a credit card, that is not worth something. That's OpEx. That's actually a negative, right? And so you can bucketize every aspect of their environment into CapEx, OpEx, or revenue is the third one. And so I'm like, I bet you could do this. So I started talking to people about it in my previous company, and I thought everyone was just like this crazy dude or whatever. Well, it turns out at least one of the companies totally took me seriously. And so my sales guy is like, I was kind of lamenting, I wish people would use this because I think it's so interesting. And he's like, no, 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 one of the companies is using it. They just don't like talking about it very publicly. So I went and talked to them. I'm like, okay, so what exactly are you doing? It turns out that they are analyzing the company before they go talk to them. They go do a sort of an analysis of their external footprint and figure out what they're running and just kind of have a dump of it. And then they go and talk to them and say, hey, we're thinking about buying you guys, you know, what are you worth, whatever. Now, something happens at that point. People start running around and doing things as they realize they're about to get acquired. Now, what they do is super, super interesting. Sometimes the footprint will grow. Okay, why would it grow? Well, it grows because they're doing something to make it look like they're doing things that they aren't doing. So they make it look like they have clients that they don't actually have. This actually happened. This is a real use case. Another example is where they might stay approximately the same, but all the services are updating, they're changing, which means you're inheriting a lot of technical debt because they don't actually have real business controls around their environment. Some guy's running around with a CD or USB stick or whatever, like manually updating things so they're going to pass your audit. And then the last one is, and this also is a real story, we saw a decline in one environment. And this is a multi-billion-dollar deal, by the way. This is not a small fry issue here. And so the cool part is since we already have a snapshot in their environment, we went back in time and said, okay, what did they used to have? What did they used to have was a whole bunch of gambling sites. So it turns out that they were cooking their books to make it look like they made a bunch of revenue off of whatever they said their primary business was, but in reality, they're making all their money off of gambling. So it totally submarined the deal, but you could have also come back to them and said, look, we're going to tell the street what you really do for a living. Like, we still want your company, but you're not worth anything close to what you think you are, and we're going to submarine you in the rest of the market if you don't give us a good deal. So there's lots of ways you can structure interesting deals around that with total asymmetric data. And so more and more companies are starting to use this. So if you want to get acquired, you should be aware that this is going to be happening more and more. So R&D and IT, for obvious reasons, they have a bunch of environments out there that they don't really know what they are. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they dangerous? Can we reduce the footprint of them? We've got like thousands of them. Is there a way to like get our arms around them, what they all are? Can we kind of structure them better? Can we reduce our costs associated with it? Because a lot of security is actually just cost reduction. It just reduces the cost of having all this extra stuff hanging out there. We got like 5,000 machines that are doing nothing. Well, they're doing nothing except burning power, bandwidth, getting hacked. I mean, they're just garbage. Like, why have them? Get rid of them. So you can use your team to kind of analyze that environment and make a better choices, business choices about it. So I think it'd be useful now to talk about AI. It's all the hotness. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I have tons of thoughts on this topic, and I work on it pretty much all the time. But I think this is kind of a good high level of the bad stuff. We could talk a little bit about the good stuff as well. But um, on the bad side, there's stuff like Worm GPT that's come out. There's also Fraud GPT that basically are they're uncensored LLMs that allow people to upload prompts to it that allow it to do basically anything. So I can say, create some worm or create some spam or create a phishing email campaign or whatever, and it'll go do that for me. So I don't really have to worry about weird controls or something in ChatGPT or BART or whatever. There's something like 140,000 different models right now. So thinking you're going to stop this is, well, just totally not understanding the problem. Probably the most current, most well-used one is something called Mixtral. It has absolutely no censorship system built into it. It's pretty slow on like an M2 chip silicon. You kind of need custom hardware for it. But I asked it, like, how would you kill all humans? And it's like happy to spit out an answer. Like, here you do. So second is stuff like Strangelove. So I talked about this a little bit in the WAF part, where if I want to fire exploit payload, I can do it extremely rapidly, like super, super fast, like 2 orders of magnitude faster than a full second. That gets a lot cooler when I have an LLM in front of it, because there's a lot of exploits that come in and I don't really know what's in them. In fact, I may know nothing about them at all. Can I process them down and turn them and kind of squish them down into just the attack payload, and then insert my payload on top of that payload to do the thing I want it to do, to send email or spam or whatever I want it to do, steal credentials? And can I just kind of shove it all together? Well, yeah, I can do it by hand. I mean, that's just a pain though, like really slow. What if I could have the thing spin up a Docker instance? And what if I could have it try a bunch of custom code? And what if I could try to get it to exploit the thing? And finally it comes out with a payload that actually works, and then fire it off using Strangelove and do it in sub-second time frame. So the LLM is too slow to do it in sub-second. At least currently, at least today. Even stuff like ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo is still too slow to do it in sub-second. But we're talking about multi-seconds as opposed to multi-minutes or hours or days when it might take a human to do it. So I spent a lot of time talking at Austin Entertainment Bureau. Are any of you members of that by chance? Okay, good. No repeats. So I spent a lot of time talking with them, a wonderful group of people, all from Hollywood, all trying to figure out like what this means for them. And my bad news for them is intellectual property does not jive well with LLMs or generative AI in general. And so we went round and round. I don't think I made a whole lot of friends in that audience, but that's okay, because what I wasn't there to do is tell them they're out of a job. What I was there to tell them is you're out of a job if you don't embrace this soon, because there is a lot of problems with trying to say I own a thing. What is that thing? If it's 50% different, is it still the thing? Because in terms of pixel density, if you're doing, let's say, Midjourney or something, I can create something that's pixel perfect from a human's cognition's perspective. It looks like a Star Wars scene, but if you do a pixel by pixel mapping, it's 0%, not 50%, 0%. So understanding what IP is going to be a monster, like a real monster. But back on the company side, let's say I want to write some code and I say, hey, engineers, I've heard about this ChatGPT thing. You should go use it. Great. Where did that code come from? It came from ChatGPT. Well, yeah, but where did it come from? Like, what's the provenance of this thing? Well, it came from somewhere. Stack Overflow, maybe from GitHub, who knows, right? Somewhere. Is it GPL? Well, I don't know. So if you ask ChatGPT, like, well, where does code come from? It's like, I don't know. You have to check your sources. Okay, well, give me your sources. It won't do that. So there's literally no way at all to guarantee that whatever ChatGPT is producing isn't going to cause copyright problems. And speaking as somebody who's spent a lot of time thinking about this kind of problem, if you insert bad code somewhere into your code base, it is incredibly easy for me to go find it and incredibly hard for you to tell what I'm going to find. So it's very asymmetric in terms of offensive patent lawsuits or copyright lawsuits. So just FYI, it ends up being accidental plagiarism is kind of what I'm getting to. It also makes it very difficult to protect IP. So this comes back to the Midjourney thing I was talking about, like what percentage of pixels are things. There's a couple people online who are really good at thinking about this problem. I think that they're a little religious about it as opposed to being completely neutral, which is a bit of a bummer because they have some really good points. But one of them was something like, if you want to try to protect like Harry Potter, like I own Harry Potter, it's the thing I own, right? And I need to be able to protect you from scraping Harry Potter. So you should never be able to scrape Harry Potter. You have to pay me if you're going to scrape Harry Potter, and then I will get some residuals or something if people use it or something like that. Okay, I'm here to tell you that will not work. It won't work. It's a bad idea. First of all, the internet routes around damage. It'll find it anyway. It's going to get Harry Potter by accident at some point. But even if you were able to somehow fully get rid of Harry Potter out of the system, like carve it out, I can still say things like, oh, Dumbledore is such an interesting character. Like, draw me a scene where Dumbledore is talking to a young wizard or something, and it's going to output Harry Potter. And the reason is it's not that it has the original data from Harry Potter, but it has just billions of examples of the human race talking about Harry Potter throughout time across the vastness of the internet. It can't weed out Harry Potter. It's part of a society. So unless you're a really small artist, like really tiny, where you can like, be very surgical about it, it's basically impossible to sort of, excise something that has turned into popular culture. It's just not going to happen. Just how it works. And so then the other problem that you're going to face if you're in the company is your intellectual property is going to start leaving the environment. It's going to start egressing out into these LLMs because people are just kind of stupid and they'll type in whatever. So they're going to put their corporate secrets in there. They're going to put customer lists in there, all kinds of crap. So just be aware of that. And then layoffs is the other big thing. So they said last year was the year of the layoffs. I'm sorry to say that is not true. This year is the year of all your contractors getting laid off. And that has a pretty big trickle down effect on the market. Yes, you might not have layoffs in your company, but you are not hiring new people. You're not backfilling the people who leave, and you are definitely not cultivating your people to find more contractors to backfill. You are saying replace all those people with LLMs. So we're going to see a massive, massive, massive downturn in terms of contractor usage amongst the biggest enterprises out there. Okay, so there are some positives. Not entirely a bearer of bad news, entirely-ish. So stuff I did not talk about, and I kind of didn't talk about intentionally, and I'm only going to spend a second or two on each. So a lot of people talk about shift left. What they mean by that is I want to do something. I'm sorry, this font's kind of small. I will explain it. Don't worry about it. I want to shift all of my security expertise as early as possible in the development process. So as people are developing it, I want to make sure that that code is good before it ships into production. That's called shift left. I don't have any really good data to give you to prove that this does or doesn't work, unfortunately. It's kind of a new idea in security, new-ish, and there's not enough empirical data over time. I am pretty sure it does work, which is good. The problem is we have 20 years of technical debt. And so, yes, it will probably work great for any new, like, green field type applications, but any stuff that's been out there that has no hope. So, and unfortunately, the vastness of the internet is built on bad, crappy old code. Next is disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is a great idea. You should definitely do it. It's the defense against ransomware. Everyone's like, what do I do about ransomware? Well, you could try to prevent it. And you might even do a good job of it, but it always helps to have a backup for multiple reasons. You might just have a fire or a flood or whatever, right? You should have a backup. Now, what Colonial Pipeline found out is that while they had a backup, they had never tested the backup. And it turns out it takes weeks to back that system up. So you should test your backups. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now, SecDevOps. I think this is probably one of the coolest new things. It's kind of shift left-ish kind of thing. There's a bunch of people who do things like Like, let's say my machines get compromised. I can just immediately refactor them, just immediately turn them back on, back to a gold image, and be off and running like within seconds. That's great. What it doesn't stop is people being able to extract data out of the system. So if you have SQL injection, command injection, or something that has some sort of information disclosure, I can still withdraw usernames and passwords out of systems, credit card numbers, or whatever we got in there. Just because you can reboot the system and get rid of me doesn't mean I didn't already egress with all that data, or I can rerun the exploit and get access again. So you do have to be a little bit careful with that. It's closer to the way backups work in terms of protecting you. Yes, it will protect you, but it won't stop the bad guy from getting everything. AI for logs. So logs are kind of tricky because logs don't look the same, even if the two systems report to do the same thing. So it can have an IIS box and it can have an Apache box. Both are web servers, both deliver web pages to the public internet. Their logs do not look the same. And they may be in different time zones, and somebody might have configured one to have more verbose logging and whatever. So getting that, narrowing it down into a palatable list of things that engineers can do is both tricky. There's a lot of companies that focus on this, like Splunk, for instance. They just got bought and they made just a boatload of money. But beyond that, you still need a human reviewer to like decide, is this something I want to take action on, or should I create a trouble ticket on it, or what? So the short answer is you can shortcut this with an LLM. You can create a pipeline as long as it's fast enough to deal with the volume you're dealing with. So you might have to have a first pass of something that's kind of gets rid of the cruft, the obvious stuff that's obviously a false negative or whatever, just get rid of anything that's just normal traffic. And then only focus the LLM's utility on those things that look kind of suspect already. So kind of a first level heuristic, which might be based something on entropy, like how random does the characters look? Because it looks really random, it's probably somebody injecting something. There's a lot of ideas around how you might be able to do that. If you see a lot of URL encoding in there, base64 encoding, that kind of stuff, more likely to be bad, hand that off to an LLM to go figure out whether you should go take action on it or not. So my big takeaway on this is I hope that at some point the CISOs will be able to decide what not to fix. That's my big goal. I don't want them walking around fixing every vulnerability because most vulnerabilities don't matter. We talked with the insurance companies and they agree about, I forget the number now, but it's like something like 64 different vulnerabilities actually lead to breach loss, not just breach loss. They actually somehow are able to exfil money out of the company. 64. And if you go to any of the big scanning companies, they'll find thousands, maybe tens of thousands of different vulnerabilities. Why? Why are we doing that? Why are we spending all of our time looking at things that are obviously not going to lead to actual loss? So that's my big takeaway. I want CISOs to have the right incentives to actually be able to pull systems, pull data out of systems that are actually meaningful and useful, and then decide what not to fix based on real business risk. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
We have a way that we do the questions, and most of you have probably been to an event before and are familiar with it. We always have a guest that is monitoring the questions in Slack and picks some of their favorite questions to ask, saving one or two for the South by Southwest badge. Probably not much of a surprise to know who I picked for tonight because she represents South by Southwest, and this is such a great opportunity. So please welcome back up Jackie Smith. All right, so Jackie, take it away and asking questions. We'll fit in as many as we can before 7:35, and then you'll ask the winning question. I'll give you a signal.
I'm holding off. All right. Let's get started with this question from Matt C. Wood. Over the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see the overall balance of power between attackers and defenders evolving? Are we headed to a more secure future or less?
That's a very good question, Matt. Well, it depends on incentives. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have. The incentives are all messed up. If you look at the venture capitalist space and you look at where people are actually spending money today, it seems like I could go and if I went to like RSA or DEF CON and go to the show floor, I throw a dart, very likely I'm going to run into an OSN company. Well, why is that? Because there's about 170 of them. Why are there 170 OSN companies out there? Well, it's because the people who place bets on the industry, they place a couple of $1 billion a year in venture capital in the industry. They don't know what they're doing. They're putting money wherever they see the new hotness. They're gonna, and trust me, there's a lot of AI companies now too. Like everything is AI. You can't buy antivirus without AI in it. 10 minutes ago it was called machine learning. Now it's called AI. They just did a search and replace. So if you're asking, is our industry maturing at the rate that attackers are? I think yes and no. We certainly have very bright people working in the space, but they're dealing with a very limited incentives across the industry, but also coming from the venture space. So the venture financiers are very interested in making a dollar, but not very interested in knowing what actually needs to be done to secure things. Because think of security a lot like the pharma industry. Apologies if there's any pharma people in the room. But your incentive in the pharma industry is not to cure people. Your incentive is to help them, but not fix them, because you make more money by kind of slowly bleeding them out and making them last for 20 years in pain while you're giving them drugs, right? Security is unfortunately very similar to that. We're not actually incented to fix the problem. We're incented to kind of drip out some products that sort of kind of move the needle a little bit. We have you might have heard this parable. There's a bear in the woods and there's two guys and you just got to outrun the other guy and then you're safe. I hate that parable. I just cannot hate anything more than I hate that parable, because it implies there's one bear, implies that you can leave the woods. It implies that somehow your friend getting eaten and making the bear better is somehow helping you out. Like it is just an absolutely terrible analogy for the security industry. If you're looking for a biology example of what the industry is, it's much more like the prairie dog. So like a prairie dog, it's kind of like a rodent and, maybe yay high or whatever. And normally it will not let any animals into its burrow. Like, why would no, you can't come in my burrow, right? But if there's a fox nearby or an eagle or something that it's like has to get away from, all comers, anybody can come in. Because what we don't see in the security world is companies helping companies. We don't see them banding together and saying, look, the industry has failed us, we need to do it ourselves. Now, the one wild card is insurance. The insurance companies they wield a very big stick. They are the tail that is wagging the dog, and they actually have a chance at forcing our industry to grow up and actually do the right thing. So if there's anybody who can do it, it's them. I'm putting my money behind them. But I think there could be a rash of new technologies if we have smarter money in the industry.
Thank you. All right. Next question is from Mark Hoffman. What is the most vulnerable sector or industry we are not aware of how devastating an attack could be?
It's subjective in what you mean, but I think what you're trying to get at is what should be keeping you up at night, and that would be probably the water and power industries. The reason is a little complicated. They have very antiquated systems. Yes, like kind of the same problems that any big old company have. But the real problem is there's no money at all to hacking those things, like none. And so therefore they have not been pressure tested the same way that, let's say, retail has or your bank has. Your bank has every incentive in the world to spend a lot of time and money trying to protect their systems. But water and power, who cares? There's no money there. There's nothing to get out of it. Maybe some servers you can run some Bitcoin mining on it or something, but there's nothing really to get out of those systems. So, and they outsource all of their credit card processing to third parties. So it's not even like they have that. They have nothing. There's nothing to break into to get. And therefore, they are not actually protecting their systems, not in the same way that you might see from, a retail, like an eBay or something that's going to smoke your local power company, let's say. I know that for a fact, by the way. I used to work at eBay. So if you are to be afraid of anything, I would start talking to LCRA and your local power and water companies or wherever you live or whatever, and start asking, what are you guys doing to protect us? Like, what kind of systems are online? Why are they online? Is there a way to get them offline? Is there a way to protect them? Like, what are you doing? Start talking to them. Ask them questions. I guarantee you they're going to hum and haw a lot, and that's a problem.
Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Sarah Parker. Outside of enterprise companies with bigger potential issues and also resources, what security threats should small businesses and solopreneurs be focused on preventing as they grow in scale?
So I think the number one problems these days are really more around ransomware. So as long as you have those backups I was talking about, you should be fine. Make sure that they can't break into those backups and ransomware those backups. So have offline backups as well as your online backups. But I mean, there's a rash of really terrible things that can happen. I think probably the most likely thing outside of that would be social engineering. So people are going to talk with your bank and pretend to be you, or they're going to talk to your CPA and pretend to be you, or pretend to be your CPA and talking to you, or whatever. And some of them are getting pretty sophisticated, and they're going to get way more sophisticated, way, way, way more sophisticated. So for instance, a friend of mine got a call from his son, and he was like freaking out. He's like, "Oh my God, Dad, like I got in this big accident. Like I need you to come. Like actually, that's not gonna work. Hold on. Like I'm like near like a whatever, not an Eagle place, but one of not Wells Fargo. What am I saying? One of those money moving places. I can't remember the name of it. Come on, someone here has had to move money at some point. Western Union. Thank you. Jeez, I know you're all the criminals. All right, that's my trick. So so he's like, yeah, you got to get over there. And look here, hold on a second. So he gives him a number. It's like, okay, get her. And he's like, what is going on? And so he's calling his wife, and she's like, I'm my son was in this thing, and like, can you get in touch with this person? Blah blah, like Wells Fargo or sorry, Western Union, do this thing. And he's like, as he's saying, he's like, wait a minute, is he there? And she's like, yeah, he's right here. She's like, who the fuck have I been talking on the phone? So someone had deep faked his son's voice and communicated with him as if he was in this crazy accident, and he couldn't tell his own son's voice. He had no idea. So that's going to be a thing. If you have money to protect, and not everybody does, or if you're working in an industry where you have to protect other people's stuff, you're going to have to be pretty good. And this involves, have a secret message that you relay in an emergency. Like, give me that secret thing that we know between each other, or that I'm always going to call you and double check this thing. Don't just move money around if I say move money around, especially if I say I need to do it right now. Especially then, don't do it. A lot of the title companies are starting to have this problem as well. People are actually getting their houses sold from underneath them because people go and stay at the Airbnb, and they'll get the mail. They'll stay there for a prolonged period of time, and they'll put it on the market, and they'll sell it from underneath them and then skip. So you really need to be like really clear with everybody. Like, here's how I do business. Get to know the people who are actually most likely to screw you, like your banker or your CPA or your accountant or whatever.
All right, next question. This comes from Sylvie Guillon. How to prevent all attacks against connected devices or self-driving cars? Who should be responsible for securing those?
All attacks? Oof. I don't think you're going to get away from all attacks because there's so many of them. Generally, air gapping things is the way to go, just taking it off the internet. So the way I think about self-driving cars is there's system one thinking and system two thinking. System one thinking is like, should I apply the brakes right now because I'm about to get in an accident? Or should I deploy the airbag right now because we're in an accident? Or, should I turn on my blinker because this person pressed the thing down right now because they're about to make a turn, right? That system one thinking, it needs to happen on board the vehicle. You should not be going out to the cloud to make decisions on it. It should not be based on an LLM. It should not be based on any heuristics. It should just work this second you do it, and it should work perfectly. System two thinking, on the other hand, is like, what's on the radio, or like, can you reroute me because it looks like some traffic up ahead and I might want to stop at a Starbucks on the way home or whatever. That can happen at a nice leisurely pace. It does not need to be in real time. So the problem is a lot of these companies are starting to put all of that stuff on one big chip, or set of chips that are all interconnected and they have access to one another. That is not great. So there's a bunch of dudes like Dina Zizovi and I'm spacing on some of the other guys' names that work specifically on this around Teslas in particular, but they've also done a lot of self-driving vehicles outside of Tesla. They're kind of in high demand, actually. And what they're saying is they need to separate those systems as much as possible. They really should not even be able to see one another. When I did a little bit of work, this is sort of pro bono work, on the Beast, which is the vehicle that the president drives around in. They were like, you can't break in this thing. It's impossible. I'm like, oh, but I can, because you have tires pressure sensor monitors. They're like right there. They're like, okay, yeah, you can, but then you're you're inside the vehicle, but you can't really do anything with it. I'm like, well, I can operate the vehicle except for like gas and brakes, right? Like, yeah, gas and brakes and steering and shit. You can't access that. So we could still drive him out of the situation. I'm like, great, but I can lock the doors, right? Like, well, yeah, you can lock the doors. All right, and I can operate the AC system, right? I'm like, yes. I'm like, so I can turn on the AC so hot he needs to get out of that car, otherwise he'll die. And like, shit, yes. So then they had to remove all the tire pressure sensor monitors. So that's the kind of shit that's like, you can't have these two systems that interconnected. Like they have to be disconnected from one another. I shouldn't be able to jump from one system, one subsystem to another subsystem. This means a lot of chips that need to be isolated physically and logically in different ways. Some systems need to be able to know that each other are talking or doing things, like drivetrains need to be able to access the fact that you're about to get in an accident, because they need to be able to lock themselves up and get more stiff. So like if you're in a BMW, for instance, like the drivetrain will like lock up because it knows that your suspension will stiffen, all the things will get much tighter, more rigid, because you're about to get in an accident. So that's a safety protocol. So those subsystems all do need to communicate, but they don't necessarily need to communicate bidirectionally. They can just go in one direction. They can just send a signal out and say, hey, I'm in distress. So there's a difference between read and write and just append, send data in one direction. So there's a lot of things that need to be done around cars. That is not my area of expertise technically. So I can get you in touch with other people who care about that problem if you really want to.
All right, great. Our next question. What ethical considerations shape your approach to cyber defense in an era of increasing digital surveillance?
It's a good question. I'm a firm believer in privacy because I think it enables creativity. If you cannot be a private citizen, you can't have thoughts. You end up being policed for your thoughts. And not every thought is great. A lot of thoughts are terrible. And a lot of thoughts are what I like to refer it to as a rough draft. Like you need to get it out of your system to get pressure tested, to have people tell you that your ideas suck, right? And sometimes my ideas suck. I prefer to be able to say that in front of a whole bunch of people who are like, no, your idea sucks, as opposed to having something terrible happen to me because I didn't follow some standard. Especially when I'm have more contentious ideas. A guy like me, I like to bucketize things in 3 different ways. The first is things I absolutely will not talk about because they are too sensitive, too dangerous. I haven't thought through them all the way. I may never get them out on the public stage. The second one is stuff I believe is probably right, but I just haven't quite gotten enough data on the topic yet, so I'm not willing to talk about it yet, but I'm working on it. And it's like the intention is to get it out there. And then the last stuff is stuff that's just open. I can talk to anybody about the problem, assuming they're willing to hear me out, and I can go for it. So the problem is that first category, because oftentimes I will have these conversations, really weird conversations. I've actually been kicked off of Microsoft's campus before. I know, big shocker. One of my ideas made it up into a foreign military, and they were actually starting to think about whether they could use this against people, like very, very seriously dangerous ideas. And from my perspective, I was just trying to talk to people, like, what do you think about this terrible idea? Like, how bad is it? Like, why? Like, tell me in what way it's bad. I know it's bad, but like we need to think through it because maybe there's a better thing that can come from this bad idea, truly bad idea. Or at least from my perspective, bad. The foreign government loved it. And so I think that if I had to put a pin on it, I would say that privacy, if I ask the average person, there's, let's say the room of 100 people, half of you will say I prefer security, and the other half will say I prefer privacy. Um, and I can almost guarantee which is which. If you have kids, you almost always prefer safety. If you don't, you almost always prefer privacy. And you bastards doing this kinky stuff or whatever you're doing without kids. I don't know what the actual rationale for that is. I just know that that is when I poll people, it's 50%. It's not like 58%. It's like half, right down the middle. And so the true answer is you kind of need both. You can't have true privacy without some moniker of security. But if you have too much security, you definitely cannot have privacy because you have full attribution. You know where everything is. You know where every packet goes to, and you know who belongs to everything on the internet, and there's no privacy whatsoever. Governments focus really heavily on backdoors. I've actually invented my own backdoor, which actually does do all the things the government wants to do. And I don't really want to give it to them because despite the fact that it would work, despite the fact that it actually does all the things on paper that they want, then what? What happens to people? Are you going to be free? Are you going to be able to dance and love and do all this crazy stuff in your privacy or home? Or are you going to feel like you're constantly being watched? Like, I worry about people. Like, I really care about people, real human beings. And I just don't believe any government is trustworthy enough to just give them the keys to everything. And that's what this would end up being. It's smarter than what you're thinking, but still stupid. Despite the fact that it would work, I think it's a bad idea. So I won't do it.
All right, thank you. And for our winning question, I need to find out if this individual is in the room. Where did you go? Sarah Parker. Is Sarah Parker in the room? Oh, she is. All right, great. And the question from Sarah, dare we ask about the security of the Texas grid? And
I think I already answered the question more or less. Let's put it this way. I have broken into water systems, power systems, and there's no great way to explain how bad it actually is. So it's bad in two very fundamentally different ways. The first way I already explained, like they're not being attacked in the same way, which means they're really easy to attack. But they're also able to be attacked physically. Like their subsystems are everywhere, and it's not like they're hidden. Like they're very easy to find. And there's a bunch of technologies that exist that are very easy to deploy that could be used to destroy the subsystems. And you wouldn't take very much to shut it down. Let's put it that way. Talking about water here for a second, which is something I know a little bit more about just because I spent more time thinking about it. I was able to take down California with water at one point, and we're talking about the California executives about it or whatever of the water company, and they're like, yeah, but you could just knock over what are they called, water fire hydrants. And I'm like, yeah, but that's kind of stupid. You'd have to like knock over fire hydrants. And they're like, yes, but it wouldn't take very many fire hydrants to do that. And when I started thinking about that as a problem, like how few fire hydrants do I have to knock out? I did the math. I figured it out. It's not very many. The same problem is true with the Texas grid. We have the exact same problem. There's a certain amount of subsystems, a certain amount of flow that goes through these systems. They're in very easy to define places. They're designed to be known and designed to be easy to fix, and therefore easy to find and destroy. There are also existing weapons like the blue, I'm going to space on the number, but like 42 or something like that, that is basically a graphite bomb. It drops a filament over the environment, and that filament short circuits things. So it doesn't actually knock it out. It doesn't actually physically destroy anything. We used it at least twice in war. I can't remember one. I think one was in Syria. Don't quote me on that. And I think one was in Jordan. Again, don't quote me on that. But we basically knocked out two completely different cities with one bomb. So it does not take a terribly large amount of destruction, and in some cases, no physical destruction at all to completely wipe out a power grid. It's very frail. Not to mention, it could just snow again. I mean, it's really, really, really bad. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jackie, for picking such great questions. Thank you, Sarah, for the winning question. And thank you, RSnake, for making sure none of us sleep very well tonight.